Hello, welcome to the third episode of Azure Community M2S. I'm one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Chang, and I'm with Kevin Green.
Hey, folks, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. We've got a really cool lineup of two amazing speakers tonight to talk to you about all things Azure. And any questions, as usual, that any folks have, please put them into the chat. Myself and Nick will answer them. And when it's relevant within the presentation, we'll have each of the speakers will answer that question as well. So,
Okay.
Nick, do you want to introduce our first speaker and go through the
Before
the
that,
house rules?
I'll give you some housekeeping. So, see, can you see my screen? Can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Slide, present, stop screen, share screen. Can you see the screen?
You can see your PowerPoint now, Nick.
Yeah. Cool. So this is our third episode, and just want some housekeeping. So we follow us on Barcode for us to stay up to date with the latest episode. You can contact us on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Stay up to date. And during our agenda, we will have 8:15, like in a few minutes. We will have Wim Matthyssen. Sorry, I pronounced it correctly. And who is an Azure MVP and Azure technical advisor. And he will do a session on Azure Cloud Sp. It's all about money. And after that, there's going to be a session roughly around 8:40 around for Cloud Solution Architect. So that's Jack Walsh. And he's doing a session on exploring the benefit of Virtual WAN. And we're closing around 9:45 approximately. And the next episode we will have on the 13th of next month. It's going to be a little early, 7:30. And it's Spot Azure Network Problem by Visualizing It by Leo Visor. And we're going to introducing easy feature flags with app configuration by Matteo Emlu at Avende. Okay, so let's bring the first guest. Okay, so as we know, Wim is doing a session. He's doing the first session on Azure Advisor. Let me share screen. Let me move mine. Okay, there you go.
And all other things also.
Yeah, I'll make sure teams.
It's quite a list I am going to talk about. So if the time runs out,
It's
just
okay.
interrupt me, and then
5 minutes.
probably, because otherwise I can keep going, I guess.
So any question, we can just put it up in the chat, or I can just shout it up, display it for you.
And Wim, this is a topic that comes up all the time when I talk to customers, all the time, right?
Every customer, whatever they're running in Azure, same questions.
Absolutely. I love the cloud. It's amazing. Or either that, or I don't know. Should I go cloud? But the question always ends in, how much is this stuff going to cost me, right? Or do you know what? We've jumped into the cloud and we're here, and we love.
We're spending too much money now.
But it's costing too much. Our CFO, our finance team. So yeah, there's a lot more than an advisor, but I'm absolutely
quite a lot more than Advisor. Advisor is a nice tool. It's a free tool you can use, but there's quite a lot of other things you can think of even before you start off. So Azure Advisor is, I think, just one thing I mentioned, but I have a lot of other things to talk about, and maybe you can implement it in your own environment. Maybe you're not using those things, but maybe you're going to use those specific resources and so on. So tips, tricks, things I see in my daily job that can hopefully help some people to save some money when running resources in Azure.
Awesome. All right, Wim, over to you. We'll wait for the magic.
Let me see if I can take over the screen.
Yep. Let me know when you share your screen. I'll put up the screen.
No, entire screen. I will take this one to share. So normally,
There you go.
screen, yeah, it's my OB1. Let me take my deck. I will split it like this. So now you should have a full screen, I think, with a slide opening. So hi everyone, welcome and thank you all for being here. My session for today is called Azure Cloud Sp. It's all about the money. I think this title already gives you quite a good idea of what I'll be talking about, and I really hope that I can share with you some valuable tips, tricks, and just like I mentioned to Kevin, and strategies that can help you save you some money with your Azure Cloud Sp or Azure bill at the end of the month. Before I dive shortly into the agenda, I want to express my gratitude to Nicholas and also Kevin and all other people involved in playing part in organizing this Azure Community Enthusiast Meetup, for organizing and for also giving me the opportunity to speak today. So the things I want to talk about, firstly, I will briefly talk about how you can understand what your Azure costs are. Yeah? You're making a design. Can I have an estimate of what everything will cost? All those things. Next, I'll discuss the significance of a good design also more deeply and how you can do some cost estimation. I also guide you through optimizing your Azure environment. So you start deploying resources into Azure in what way whatsoever. And yeah, you want to optimize those costs. I will also do it through some demos, more screen demos, but yeah, you will get the picture, I think. And in the last part, if I still have some time, of course, I'll explore some strategies that can, in a way, help you to stay informed and maintaining control over your costs. And completely at the end, I will also touch on key takeaways to really focus on things I think you should really remember about this session. And probably, if I have some time, we will also find the time to answer any of your questions. Let me also shortly, briefly introduce myself for people who don't know me. So you almost pronounced my name correctly, Nicholas. So if I say it in Dutch, it's Wim Matthyssen, but most people, English natives, say it Wim Matthyssen. So I'm living in Belgium and I'm working as an Azure technical advisor for quite a big telco in Belgium called Proximus. I'm also a board member of a Belgium user group called MC2MC, where we focus on Microsoft cloud and clients like Intune and all those things, but also on the complete hybrid cloud picture and even, we're even touching Windows Server and those things. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer and an Azure MVP. And if you ever want to reach out, ask a question related to Azure Cost Management, maybe reach out to my socials. They're all on the screen at the moment, or you can simply scan the QR code if you want. To really kick things off, it's safe to say that most of us enjoy having money, but also love spending it. And with the convenience of the public cloud, to extend your on-premise environment, it's these days quite easy to create and utilize various cloud resources and services, which mostly all cost some money. And to explain a little bit more, we need to jump a little bit back in time when virtual machines, for people who still remember those, or VMs became the standard, and people deployed them for particularly any reason, without mostly, and in some companies without much thought. So VMs were spun up, reft and light and reft, seemingly without consequences. However, the problem arose when those VMs were neglected. The moment they weren't properly managed, shut down, or deleted, whenever they weren't required anymore. And this mostly ended up with spending more money on hardware and licenses just to keep those idle or VMs that don't need it to be used anymore up and running. And well, in a cloud world, we see the same thing happening. Instead of VMs, we see cloud resources being deployed, and without much considerations. It's quite easy to spin up whatever in Azure. Even for the ClickOps people, with a few clicks, you have quite a lot of resources up and running. So in a way, from in the beginning, from a VM crawl, we now moved on to more a cloud crawl because everybody is using those public clouds. But at the end of the day, or better, at the end of the month, somebody still needs to pay the Azure bill. And I think probably some of us will already know what I mean when a manager comes in and asks, why are we spending so much money on this resource, or why are we much spending on those Azure environment? Because you said when we move to the cloud, everything would be easier to set up, everything would be cheaper. But in the end, I only see this bill and we need to pay it, fix it, lower our costs. So probably a lot of people are familiar with that. So effectively managing your Azure cloud throughout your complete organization should be quite a crucial aspect of every company's Azure cloud journey. And you can actually break this down in my opinion, in 3 components. First and foremost, understanding your Azure cost is essential, and know that a good estimation and knowledge of why those costs are there can really help you on your way. Then, once you're operational and you're already using quite a lot of those Azure resources, it's always time to optimize your environment. And this step is quite crucial to reduce your cloud costs and enable you to achieve to do more within your budget limits. And this step is also, in my opinion, an ongoing effort. It's nothing you do once. You need to do it even maybe a few times a month. Look at those things, see if you can optimize them. Maybe you can switch a specific resource by another new resource, which is in the end cheaper. Maybe you can change your storage requirements. They change maybe you can lower them down. You don't need those hot storage maybe anymore. You can maybe move specific resources to archive storage, and so on and so on. So, and the third one, control, also quite important. In my opinion, you should always try to control, monitor, and analyze your costs, and this also on a quite a regular basis. This, for example, allows you to hold a specific department or teams accountable for their use of Azure resources. So in a way, you should also see accountability as an important aspect of managing your cloud spend. So try to remember those 3 things and try to do those things in your environment. But let us look at the first topic, and hopefully this can already help you to lower your costs, and that's by understanding your costs. And to get started, it's quite important to understand that by utilizing cloud-based applications and workloads, such as all those different types of Azure services and resources, companies in a way transition from a CapEx model to a more operational expense or OpEx model. And this shift in a way eliminates the need of substantial upfront investments, replacing it with a more consumption-based pay-as-you-go, or as some people say, a more mostly predictable monthly fee you need to pay at the end of the month. So in a way, you switch from a traditional way where you were, where you bought your hardware and peripherals such as printers and servers upfront. So you paid for them and used them for 3 years, and after 3 years, you bought some new servers or hardware or whatsoever, and you already paid for those 3 years upfront. And when you start using those Azure resources, you switch the model from CapEx to OpEx, and you start spending only the money on the Azure resources and servers when the need arises. So in a way, you pay for each month for the things you use. That's it. So different approach. And as many of us are aware, there are quite numerous factors for a company to consider when moving to the cloud, and why would they move to a cloud. In a way, it's not only see if the business is ready to make a transition to Azure. It's always quite crucial that the IT teams and the skill set in the IT teams also are all capable, are those people capable to handle an Azure environment and so on. And if there, for example, is quite a skills gap, you can start developing Azure learning paths, which can become quite essential, because maybe people were just used of doing all that on-prem stuff, but they're not really capable of managing cloud. So they need to learn those things. And that's also something you need to keep in mind whenever you switch, because that also asks some time and probably some money in the end. But luckily, the 6 R's can also help you to get started and to get you into your cloud journey. Probably a lot of you already know about the 6 R's. Previously, people were always talking about the 5 R's. I always want to get into the 6 R's, where the first one is the rehost. So you have a specific resource running on a server on-prem, and you kind of pick it up, lift and shift it, and run it in Azure. So first phase VM is on-prem, second phase VM is just in Azure, and you can use a tool like Azure Migrate, for example. Another one, the other R, refactor. Maybe you have an Azure SQL server on-prem, you re-platform it, and you start to run those databases that were previously running on that on-prem SQL server into Azure SQL or an Azure SQL managed instance. Third one, remain. It's a resource. You assessed it, you looked at it, but in the end, in your opinion, it's better that that resource stays that it is. So it remains where it is. You don't migrate it, you don't switch it, you don't re-platform, redesign it, change it to a SaaS solution or whatsoever. Just keep it like it is. Then cloud native way, probably the one that Nicolas finds the best way. You redesign it, rebuild, re-architect. Maybe that specific workload application was running on a VM on-prem, and now you start to run it in a container in AKS, for example. So you completely redesign, re-architect it, so it works in a cloud native way instead of like it was running on premises. The fifth one, replace. You have a specific workload on-prem, and maybe you can map it or change it by a SaaS application you buy. SaaS application, you don't need to do a lot of hassles anymore. You don't need to manage it. You buy it and you start using it. And then last option, retire. You see that workload probably doesn't get used anymore quite a lot in your environment, and you just leave it until nobody uses it anymore, and you retire it and it's completely gone. So you also don't touch it. You just let it go until nobody needs that specific workload anymore, and you retire it. So quite a few options. But in a way, it's quite crucial to recognize that any chosen approach significantly impacts how the monthly costs will end up at the end of the Azure month, because depending on how the workload is running in Azure, you probably will pay some more or less for that specific type of resource where you switch to. Another fundamental point, in my opinion, to remember is the concept of shared responsibility. And this shared responsibility varies based on the chosen type of Azure workload. So is it IaaS, is it PaaS, is it SaaS? And nowadays, even if it's CaaS or FaaS, you should always remember that Microsoft will handle everything depending on what type of thing you choose until a certain point. But you as an Azure consumer, as an Azure customer, will also bear some responsibility. So also understand this part. It's vital. In my opinion, it's quite vital. Whenever you make any of your high or low-level designs for any of your Azure projects, whether it's a brownfield or a greenfield deployment, it doesn't matter. Keep those things in mind. That depending on, maybe it's easy for you to just lift and shift, but your management just stays the same. Microsoft will take care of a specific part of that virtual machine underlay, but you're still responsible to update that VM, to make backups of that VM, to protect the data in that VM, and so on and so on. So every design decision you make will probably have another decision in the end, and will probably, in the end, change your pricing model. Of course, when you're making your plan or your initial design, it's essential for every architect, I think, to estimate the associated costs. And it's always good to know and understand what possible cost savings there can be. And this is where, hopefully, I think and hope that a lot of people know it, is where the Azure Pricing Calculator free tool comes in. It can guide you in creating a detailed estimate for new Azure deployments or modification to your existing workloads. But what's really important to remember here is provide an estimate based on the information you provide. And in the end, it's still an estimate, and it's not an exact mapping of, yeah, you estimated this and now our bill is like this. There are other factors that come into play. So it can already help you to do a good estimation. One thing to remember whenever you start working with the Azure Pricing Calculator is that you specify your correct currency, because I still see a lot of people switching between euros, dollars, and British pounds probably. And by not switching that specific price, they do the complete calculation in dollars without looking at it. And then the price will be differently than when you calculate it in euros. Another thing, if you start configuring, you can log in. Pricing will also change if support is included or not. And you also need to specify your specific program. So maybe you're a CSP partner, then you should choose CSP as a licensing program. Maybe you just want to pay as you go or whatsoever. So just make those things and those settings correctly. Otherwise, the price will also be different than probably expected. You can also show those dev test pricing. So Azure Pricing Calculator, go firstly to the bottom, change those things, and then add the resources you want to price. So just a little tip. And next to the Azure Pricing Calculator, you can also use another calculation in combination with the Azure Pricing Calculator, and that's the Azure Total Cost of Ownership, or TCO calculator. It's also a free tool that helps you estimate potential cost savings when migrating your on-premises workloads to Azure. When you define your workloads and filled in all assumptions, an example of such a workload is shown at the screen right now. So we have some servers, you fill in all those different tabs, and at the end of it, when you went to all those different assumptions, you will receive a detailed report outlining the savings you can achieve by moving these workloads to Azure within, for example, a specific time frame of 5 years. It's quite a lot of tabs and workloads specification and even electricity specification you need to fill in. But in the end, it can really help you to make a good estimation and to make a real a real change. What moving that specific resource will mean to you when you move it to the cloud. So by combining and using both calculations, you can already get quite a good idea what your estimated cloud costs will be. Next to that, there are also quite a lot of other calculators and estimators. I also put one on this slide. For example, that's one I also use quite a lot. A lot of companies have IaaS resources running. They have Azure Files running. Maybe they have some other resources running they want to backup. And then by hand of the Azure Backup Pricing Estimator, you just go to the site, download the Excel, fill it in, and it will do the calculations for you. So it's not an online or a website where you need to go through. It's something you need to download, and then you can use that specific Excel to map the right Azure Backup Pricing estimates for the things you want to back up through Azure. So also, if you work with Azure Backup, look at this, try it out, and estimate before you plan or set up anything Azure Backup related. A thing I also want to mention to customers, You can use that Azure pricing calculator. You can use that TCO calculator, but we all know Microsoft prices change quite a lot. So most of the time, every specific Azure resource, an example, for example, over here is the Azure Arc, has its own pricing page. And if you go to those specific pricing pages, you can also set your currency correctly over here. So maybe in the UK, you set it to UK and then pounds. And now you will see the exact pricings for that at that moment for those specific resources. For example, once again, something Nicholas would look at. Azure Kubernetes also has its own pricing page. Same thing, set your currency and then look at those different prices for all those different settings you can apply. So whenever I make a design for a customer, I do an estimation by using the Azure pricing calculator, but also check it out with the own pricing pages of every Azure resource I use in that specific design to see if everything is correctly and maybe there's a little change in the pricing, for example. So definitely also look at all those different pricing pages. There are also quite a lot of other resources that can help you making a good design and making a good cost estimation before you start deploying. First of all, I hope everybody is aware of this one, the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, or CAF, which offers you a collection of documentation filled with implementation, best practices, and tools. Next to that, you can also look at the Azure Architect Center. So whenever you're in the process of architecting new cloud workloads or exploring new Azure use cases, for example, the Azure Architect Center is quite an excellent resource to find whatever you want to think, because it offers a wide variety of implementation examples, which can really help you and guide you on your way whenever you make any high level or low level design. Of course, a tool I use quite a lot when doing migration projects at customer sites is Azure Migrate. It helps you to discover, assess, and migrate your on-premises resources to any kind of specific workload in Azure. You can use it for lift and shift, but you can also use it to make assessments of the SQL servers running in the databases and the capability of those databases to be migrated to Azure SQL, for example, and so on. And if you're uncertain about how to begin as a bigger company, maybe to begin your cloud migration journey, you can also look at the Azure Migrate program, which can really help you. Whatever you need guidance or want to collaborate with a migration partner, this is a program that can really give you the support you need. So once again, 4 new resources you can use to help you make your design and save you some cost. And I think most of us will also know this one, the Microsoft Azure Enterprise Scale Architecture. For people who don't, it's quite a comprehensive framework designed to provide organizations with a consistent and scalable approach to Azure, to start your Azure cloud adoption. It offers best practices, also quite a lot of reference architectures. It handles governance principles, ensuring a seamless management of resources and so on. It foresees security and compliance at scale. But the thing I wanted to mention is, and as a tip, most importantly, I also want to give you the advice to also check out the reference implementations, which can help and set you on your way to start with a good foundational landing zone, regardless of whether applications are being migrated or newly developed and deployed to Azure. In this specific GitHub repo, the link is at the bottom of the slide. You can currently find, I think it's five reference implementations for all kinds of different scenarios. So probably one of them will fit your environment, so you can already use those and customize those within your own environment and design. It's more when you start deploying, but maybe you can test one of those out on a test subscription or on some test subscriptions, see what comes out, and see if specific things you can also implement in your own environment. Just an idea. I knew some customers that have separated subscriptions just to test those things out, see what comes out, and then see if they can integrate it in any of their designs or any of their new landing zones you want to set up. Specifically for hybrid connectivity, you want to start with hybrid connectivity of whatsoever. They see what comes out of it and then try to map it to their own environment and use the things they want to use. Just a tip. When creating your design, selecting the appropriate subscription type is also a crucial step. Since all those different subscriptions come with different rates, offers, and benefits, the ones mostly seen in companies are the enterprise or Microsoft customer agreements these days. I also work myself for a Microsoft Cloud solution provider, so I also see quite a lot of CSP subscriptions, but there are tons of others like Visual Studio subscriptions, the pay-as-you-go. You even had previously those MSDNs, but I think they swapped them to those Visual Studio subscriptions. But when you use one of those enterprise agreements or MCA agreements, the prices of your subscriptions and the prices for your Azure resources will differ significantly from when you, for example, just have a pay-as-you-go subscription. Pay-as-you-go subscription, you pay quite a lot of money for every Azure resource. So definitely also think of that when you start deploying. Also be aware of all your other licenses. Also something I also mentioned quite a lot to all my different customers. Look at those licenses you have for SQL Server. Look at those you already have for VDI. Is it Citrix? Is it VMware View? Whatsoever. Look at all those licenses for your hypervisors like VMware and so on. Look at your network, your NVAs, for example. Maybe you're already running Fortinet on-prem or Checkpoint or whatsoever. So whenever you want to move anything to the cloud, first see if those licenses fit the same resource into Azure. Maybe you need to move away from Citrix and you're better off with moving to AVD, for example. But if your Citrix license is still being paid off for the next 3 years, maybe you still have to wait, and so on and so on. So really know about everything, all those other licenses also. It's quite important whenever you start thinking of moving specific things to the cloud. Before I forget to mention, if you, for example, also have such an enterprise agreement or an MCA, I know it's not every customer that has one, but if you have one, also think that you can also use those enterprise dev test subscriptions, which offer special rates for services like VMs and SQL databases. And when you have those, you can even pair those with those free-to-use SQL Server Developer Editions to significantly reduce your test environment cost, for examples. The only thing, and I can't pinpoint this enough, that you need to remember that it's crucial not to set these up for any of your production workloads or databases. So you can test things out, but they're not for production. So if you have those, you can also save some money at the end of the month. Next to that, there are also quite a lot of services that are free for 12 months, while others are free for always. Like Nicolas already mentioned, for example, Azure Advisor. It's a free Azure service you can use. You never need to pay for it. You can also use, for example, a specific amount of Azure functions. I think it's a limit of 1 million requests at the moment. But if you start using those free services or tools for a specific amount, be aware of those limitations when you start using them, and know whenever you start paying for those things. For example, if you go to the Azure Marketplace in the Azure portal and you type in the bar free, you will find also quite an amount of free Azure resources and services you can use. So definitely think and look at those. And for testing purposes, maybe there are some developers in the room, in the virtual room. And if you're not already using it, you should definitely look at Azure Dev Test Labs. but because it enables you to rapidly provision a development or test environment without any additional charges for the service itself. To spin it up, the only thing you pay is for the Windows and the Linux VMs that you use. So for developers, test environments, also look at this. It's quite easy to spin up. I still have some time, I hope. Okay. So as already briefly mentioned, I touched it a little bit, I think. There are quite several design decisions that can impact your costs. Like, for example, selecting the correct storage. And this not only from a replication perspective, where you have the options like you can see on the screen, LRS, GRS, ZRS, GZRS, and all the read access variants, but also consider your SLA needs and storage tiers, like, do I need hot storage, do I need cold, do I need archive, because all of those things can affect your monthly costs. And I think you should really remember that while costs matter, also weigh other factors like setting access tiers up properly based on account and blob levels, and ensure your choices align with your overall requirements, with your business requirements, technical requirements, and not just with your expense requirements or cost requirements. See that it maps them all. Another tip I can give you, deploying Azure resources, for example, in a different region can also save you some money. And this is because depending on which Azure region you deploy your resource, the rate can be lower than when you deploy it in another region. However, it's crucial to consider data compliance, of course, and legal obligations when exploring these options. So this thing doesn't fit every company, because maybe some companies are only allowed to deploy in the German Azure data centers, for example, and are allowed to move or deploy any resources in any other Azure region in Europe, for example. And another thing you should remember is that not all Azure resources are available in all regions. There are some regions, for example, where Azure Bastion doesn't have all the features like we're used to using it in the UK Azure data centers or in West Europe, for example. So whenever you think of this, see if the resource you want to use is also available and that you're legally allowed to deploy it in that specific region. Little thing which maps through to the session of Jake. There are also some design considerations you can make related to Azure networking and the Azure networking resources you use in your environment, because in the end, it can also have an impact on your cost. For instance, when you use the hub and spoke topology, you should be mindful of the ingress and egress data charges between VNets that are peered, for example. With the hub and spoke, you have a hub, and probably all your spokes are peered to the hub. Maybe you also peer some spokes that need to be able to communicate with each other and so on. So peering in the end will cost you some money. And if you peer between regions and do some global peering, so there's also a difference between global peering and regional peering, prices will also differ. Also, think of your hybrid connectivity, maybe starting with a site-to-site VPN and a lower SKU VPN gateway might in the beginning be more sufficient than maybe starting off with an expensive and directly opting for the express route, for example. So maybe a site-to-site VPN and a lower SKU, gateway SKU will already handle all your traffic, and you don't need to think of directly moving on to express route. Also think of all the Azure load balancer services you want to use in your environment, because pricing will also vary between application gateways, front doors, and so on. By the way, if you want to have a handy tip to see which of those load balancing services fits your workload, there is also a help me choose click-through available in the Azure portal. Just type in load balancing in the global search bars and click through those things, and you probably will end with an application gateway or a front door in the end, depending on what you answer to the questions. So also a little tip. And of course, look at Virtual WAN, but I think Jake will explain quite a lot in the next session. Also, a thing I want to mention, and because I see still a lot of companies, especially in Belgium, using quite a lot of Azure IaaS VMs. And lift and shift is mostly still one of the first migration scenarios. A lot of companies use whenever they start their cloud journey. I also want to mention some smaller design decisions that can impact your Azure compute costs. This starts with selecting the appropriate VM series and size. Unfortunately, the thing I see is that a lot of companies still map their on-premises VMs that are running on VMware or Hyper-V into a VM SKU in Azure, and not just for the vCPU and the V memory, but also for the attached disk to an Azure VM size. And in the end, when you do it like that, it mostly always ends up with an oversized or an over-provisioned Azure VM. So in the end, you pay too much money for that specific VM, and probably you could do it with much lower SKU than the one you will spin up the VM with. And in the end, all those things will lead up to unnecessary extra costs. So also keep that one in mind. Think about availability sets. See how many VMs you need to have in an availability set. Best practice, if you're still running IaaS VMs, is always better to have availability sets or availability zones. So if one data center or a specific node rack in the data center goes down, that your specific workload is still running and capable of running. Also, look at those B-series VMs, those burstable VMs. Probably for quite a lot of your workloads, B-series will do the trick, and you probably don't need to end up with a higher SKU where you pay a lot of money for. So to lower your costs, also look at those B-series. I see those running quite a lot in the smaller companies in Belgium because they put almost every workload on a B-series, although it's not for every workload, but they still do, just to save some money. And also look at Azure Spot VMs. To be honest, the last year, I wasn't able to spin up any kind of Azure Spot VM in the West Europe region. I know you can still spin some up in the East US region, but yeah, try it out. Maybe in the region you want to deploy, it works. And then you can also use those for your not critical workloads. So the thing with the Spot VM is whenever you specify a specific VM, you map it as a Spot VM, and whenever Microsoft needs that specific resource capacities, it can drop your VM or it can down it and take those specific settings so it can use it for any of its other resources in the data center. But in addition to those design tips, I always say to my customers, try to think beyond IaaS and explore the more cloud optimized approach of running your workloads. So think about utilizing container instances, AKS, or app services instead of simply deploying, lifting, and shifting VMs. This flow chart you can find in the Azure Architect Center. So if you ever want to follow this flow chart to see if a specific workload can be run on something else than just a VM, try it out, and hopefully you will end up with something differently than a VM. And before jumping over to the next topic, I really want to mention that before making any design, you also need to think of all those trade-offs. Just remember, more security for my cloud resources will cost more money, more availability will cost some more money, and more reliability will also cost some more money. Nicolas, do I still have some time for the next topic? He's not saying anything, so I think I have. So the next topic.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nicolas.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Can I go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah, I should do 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Okay, I will do quite fast. Next topic: optimize your Azure environment to lower costs. To reduce, for example, your IaaS expenses, consider utilizing reserved instances by reserving VMs from a specific SKU for 1 or 3 years. You can also enhance your savings further by pairing this with the hybrid use benefit, enabling you to use your existing Windows or SQL licenses with software assurance for Azure VMs or SQL servers. Next to those Azure RAIs, you can also use Azure Reservations for, like you can see on the screen, quite a lot of other resources. So, for example, you can use it for your managed disk, for your SUSE Linux, even for your app services, Azure Cosmos DB. So whenever you use any of those specific resources, look at those reservations, because if you're using them longer than a year, it's maybe better to reserve them, because in the end, it will save you quite a lot of money. Also, look at the free service, Azure Advisor. It has a specific topic purely focused on cost. So it can help you saving money on your VMs, on other Azure resources. The only thing, remember, it needs to run for a month at least on an existing environment. Otherwise, those cost things you can win won't pop up. There's a way you can look at it through the Azure portal, but there is also a better way where you can automate it. You can enable, if you go into Azure Advisor, you can enable those alerts. You can set up an alert, for example, for all categories. If you only want those cost recommendations, select that specific category. And then you create a specific action group. In that action group, you specify who needs to be informed and in what way. So, for example, you want every contributor of a specific subscription where those cost optimization or recommendations pops up, that they receive an email. You can even put actions in that specific action group that, for example, decapicates or stops a specific resource, which I won't advise if it's a production resource. So to automate those things and to not, so you don't need to look at the Azure portal every month, set those alerts up, send them out every week, for example, to those specific people that's required that information, and they just receive an email saying you can save some money on that specific resource if you do this or that, and so on and so on. Next to those alerts, also something that's in preview, but in my opinion, quite useful, Azure Cost Optimization Workbooks. So just go to the Azure Advisor page. Let me see my pin pointer. Select Workbooks, and over there you find that Cost Optimization Workbook, and you can do, you get some optimizations and advisor recommendations for networking resources, storage resources, and compute resources. In the networking part, for example, if you have public IP addresses that are doesn't associated with any other resource in your environment and they're just living there, or you have maybe some disks that were previously attached to a specific VM, you deleted that VM, but you didn't clean up those disks, all those things will be shown over here. So really a nice way to, in a visual way, see which things are causing money or which things are still there and are not required anymore to be there. So definitely also look at that specific workbook, click through all those different options you have, click through all those tabs, and it will probably help you save some money at the end of the month. You will also get a green mark if everything is like it should be and you're not spending unnecessary money. The thing I also want to mention is try to, if your first setup in your first migration approach was lift and shift, or you started with the greenfield deployment with EAS VMs, you should always try not to make it the end state, because now it's really time to modernize. So for example, if you're running in Azure EAS file server, think of switching that data to Azure Files, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business. If you're running in EAS SQL Server, because it was the easiest way to get it up and running in Azure, now think of moving those databases to an Azure SQL database, Azure SQL Managed Instance. If you're still running RDS servers into Azure, definitely look at Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365. If you're running EAS DNS servers, maybe some features of that DNS servers can be moved to Azure DNS or Azure DNS private DNS zones. And print server, not a resource you should be running or not a workload you should be running in Azure, but maybe you did. Try to start thinking of universal print, for example. Other ways to keep your IaaS VM costs down, look at auto shutdown. It's a nice way to do it. Previously, we had Azure Automation start and stop solution. I was not a huge fan of that one. So now you can directly from the VM blade configure that auto shutdown, or you can do it programmatically. The only thing is it only shuts down, you can't start up. So you need to find out something else to start it up. But luckily, Microsoft also added some other automation tasks, which allows you by adding a task, selecting specific templates, like for example, power of a virtual machine or deallocate a virtual machine, but you can make separate tasks. So at a specific time, you can deallocate a virtual machine, and maybe during the startup of business hours, you can start up the virtual machine. Also know this thing is still in preview, but from the moment it gets GA, you will probably pay for this. Last thing I want to mention, I think, storage lifecycle management. If you have quite a lot of storage, Azure storage accounts in your environment, you can also enable that lifecycle management, where you create a rule for all the data or blobs inside that Azure storage account. You can specify if that specific blobs are there for 30 days, move it from hot tier to the cold storage tier. If they're there for 60 days, move it from the cold store to archive storage, and after 90 days, just delete the data. So definitely also something that can help managing your lifecycle management of your blob, but will also in the end save you some money. And also think of optimizing your Azure backup costs. Think of whenever you deploy recovery services fault, think of the if you require locally redundant storage, do you require GRS storage if it's production, and so on. But definitely look at your backup policies, because how longer you retain something in backup, how more money you will pay for it. And maybe for specific workloads, you can start using different backup policies. So maybe you don't need that daily, monthly, weekly schedule. Maybe you just need those backups for 30 days. And that data can be restored, for example. Or maybe if you're backing up IaaS VMs, you only need to back up the OS disk and don't need to back up any data disk, or the other way around. Also specify those things and think in front of it, because how more you enable, how more you will pay. And with that, I will quickly go to the last thing. I will share my slides, Nicolas, but otherwise, Jake will get out of time. Few key takeaways. Take time, first of all, to make a good design. It's quite important to save some money at the end. Use all those free built-in Azure services and tools. So use Azure Advisor, but also use Azure Pricing Calculator, use Azure Cost Management, and so on. Try to think beyond the IaaS, because spinning up VMs is something almost everybody can, but in the end, it will be probably quite a lot more expensive than maybe running it in a PaaS service, the same resource or workloads. Try to remain in control of your Azure environments. Use management groups, use those cost management tags, use tags that specify an end date, use tags that specify resource owners, so that accountability is you can do that accountability and pinpoint somebody out that's responsible for a specific resource and why it costs that amount of money. And keep in mind that cost optimization, cost control is an ongoing task. It's not something you do once a month. You need to do it a few times a month, and it's almost a daily job, I think. With that being said, I thank you for your attention, and despite of my lack on time, I just wanted to cover that third option. But if you have any questions related, or you just want to go through that third things I wanted to mention, just pinpoint, and you can always contact me through my Twitter handle or through LinkedIn. And I hope in the time I talk to you, learn some tips that can help you to save some money at the end of the month, your Azure bill.
Wim, I thought that was a really great session and some really, really great information for people just to think outside the box when it comes to Azure Cost Management.
Yeah, it's a session of an hour, so
yeah. Look, like you, I could probably talk. I could talk on that topic for 2 or 3 hours if I was given the time as well. And we haven't had any direct questions into the chat, but just a couple of things that I've been asked in the past, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on. And Jake, totally conscious of your time coming on as well. So if you're okay, Jake, we'll assign maybe 5 minutes to the Q&A here for Wim, just to close out and just make sure that anyone even watching the recording of this has some of the answers that they might not have had an opportunity to ask. So Wim, you mentioned Azure Migrate, one of my favorite tools for assessing workloads for migration, or maybe not necessarily direct migration. You might just want to get an idea of some costs for some similar workload types to move into Azure. Have you tried the business case reporting feature, which is in preview of Azure Migrate at the moment?
Yeah, I tried it, but it's still in preview. So I'm mostly the preview stuff I don't mention to customers. So I only, when I do it at customer sites and do an assessment for them, I mostly do the things that are GA. Yeah, it's something my company also stands behind. So we only deploy things at customer sites which are GA, but it's definitely something that really can help things. It's a kind of that TCO calculator, another way around, in a simpler way, integrated into Azure Migrate probably, because if you try to optimize and look at costs, there are a lot of tools you can use and a lot of sites you can hop through, but hopefully everything will be integrated into Azure Migrate, so there is one place, single pane of glass you can look at just whenever you want to migrate or assess some things you probably want to move. So
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And I totally get it, right? I also work for an Azure Expert MSP and Microsoft partner. We can't just roll out preview stuff just into production. But the great thing about talking about this stuff in a community webinar, if you like this, is that we can bring that preview stuff to the table just for thoughts, right? So we all
I mentioned quite a lot of preview things on the way, I think.
Yeah, but, and some of them won't. Like Microsoft might just cut. They might just say, "Hey, here's a preview." We all get really excited about it, and then just go, "Nah, we're not gonna."
Okay, it's gone.
It's gone. But from a cost management perspective, the business case reporting, I think, is awesome. Have you seen? I haven't had a chance to play with it. I've signed up to the wait list for the AI infused, the Gen AI,
that's one I still need to subscribe to. I also saw it pop it up somewhere, and I wanted to use it, but there's quite a lot of things you need to list these days.
Yeah, it's like listen, this. Like I suppose the point is, like that stuff is awesome, and for anyone else,
it will probably help quite a lot of people because it will answer a lot of their questions for them. Just
right, exactly. And that's the point, like so the AI infused cost management is basically your corporate chat GPT inside Azure Cost Management. Hey, what are my, you type in chat, what are the costs for the last, my last 12 months, what does it look like? But the point is Microsoft are putting huge effort and huge budget into presenting these costs and presenting these scenarios back to users. And I suppose for anybody watching this, if they're trying to think about, are Microsoft just here to take my money and is the cloud too expensive to run? No, they want to show you this is the best way to present your business case back. This is the best way to save costs. Looking at things like reserved instances, savings plans, stuff like that.
That Azure cost optimization work is also a thing where it pinpoint almost everything out there. It's just a visual way to say, look at this, look at that. Without you setting up all those rules and then queries in your your log analytics workspace. It's just for you there. Just download it, implement it, and you can start using it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's awesome. And then just to close out, Wim, there was one question. Susheta, thank you so much for putting in the question. I'm going to read it out. Actually, thanks, Nick. You've put it up on screen. So what are your thoughts on few orgs considering retracting back to on-prem from the cloud due to inflated cloud spend? Do you think if they properly leverage such tools, they could largely reduce costs? And before you answer that, I was at an event up in the north of Ireland in Belfast last week, and I was asked a very similar question. And I think the term, and it's a big marketing term, that potentially organizations who are not cloud focused are pitching, and it's called cloud repatriation. So where does cloud repatriation come into play here? So I'll let you answer and close out.
I have a customer similar like that, and most of the time when this happens, in my opinion, is because they started off wrongly with using Azure. Probably were a ClickOps minded, just click through it, and they were deploying stuff without knowing how everything was built in the back and what they were deploying. And most of the time I had such a customer, and I did an assessment of their current Azure environment and how they deployed it. And after I went through it, and if you do this, you could have saved this much amount of money. They overlooked it and redesigned the complete environment. So it depends. Most of the times, people don't look, they just spin things up, don't look at all those things I mentioned in the design phase. They're just spinning things up. And if you just do click, deploy, probably it will end up you quite some money. But in the end, if you're running those things on-prem and you're doing the same thing on-prem, click, that VM sprawl, spinning up VMs, putting those workloads, at the end, it will also cost you some energy, more of those things, more licenses, and
I think that's probably why governance is very important to restrict the usage of it. But in related to advisor, I think Azure Advisor is kind of leaning towards FinOps, where it's like, about money and keeping it for the future and stuff.
And you mentioned Wim, sorry, I was going to say, you mentioned the cloud adoption framework. Nick, you mentioned the governance. I think, and Susheta, hopefully to answer your question collectively, if you put the right framework in place from the start, your costs should be understood and shouldn't spiral out of control. Now, that's easy said when it's a greenfield, brand new environment, right? So if you're working as a consultant, or if you starting a new organization, or you're given ownership of a new Azure environment where maybe the proper landing zone and the proper governance was not put in place, the great thing is that all of this Azure cost management technology, if you like, and solutions, they can all be retrofitted back into the landing zone. But you need to understand it first, and your organization and your customers and your business need to understand that, if our costs are this high, why? We've taken customers down from huge cost to, I won't say minimal, but significantly lower. And sometimes Microsoft don't like that, because they don't want to see people reducing their costs. But what they don't want is to have customers leaving the platform because it's exponentially too expensive, right? So there has to be that easy medium, and there has to be that understanding of cost, whereby if you're in the cloud, the first reason you should stay in the cloud, and Jake has a good session now on Virtual WAN, which is a relatively new networking technology, where we'll talk about some advantages that you might not necessarily get on-prem. But when you're in the cloud, you get that extensibility, and you get that new capability that you might not be able to build on-prem. But you also need to understand that everything like that has a cost implication, and you need to make sure that you and the business understand that, and that you can, I suppose, architect and govern it properly.
It's like I said in the beginning, understand, optimize, and control. And control, for me, it's at the same step as understand. And optimize, it's not underneath each other, it's next to each other. But understand is quite an important step in the whole designing phase of your Azure environments.
Absolutely.
And really understand your cost and what you're paying for, and why you require those settings, or why you require that storage or whatsoever, or networking resource, and so on and so on.
Exactly. So Wim, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, and Susheta, I think we've answered you. Thanks for your comments in the chat. So we'll close out and say thank you so much to Wim for his time and his really great session. And we're now going to move over to Jake. So I'd like to welcome Jake Walsh, who, like Wim, is also a fellow Azure MVP, and he's going to present a session on Azure Virtual WAN. So Jake, over to you.
Thank you very much. Give me 2 seconds. I'll present my screen. Hopefully you can see my screen okay now.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. I can see that. Yeah, so thank you for having me. As you know, my name is Jake Walsh. I'll be talking today about exploring the benefits of Azure Virtual WAN. Just a quick thank you, firstly to Wim for that amazing session there. Learned lots and lots of great insights and all of that stuff you went through. Really, really awesome. So thank you. Also thanks to Nick and Kevin for having us on this session. Really good to be here. Appreciate you setting all of this up. So a little bit about me. I'm a solution architect. I work in the UK, predominantly focused on Microsoft Azure. Lucky enough to be an MVP, also HashiCorp ambassador, Citrix CTA as well. So spend a lot of my time working with Azure, working with infrastructure as code, particularly desktop virtualization as well. So AVD, that sort of stuff. Pretty active on all sort of social channels. So X, formerly Twitter, JakeWalsh90, GitHub, JakeWalsh90, on LinkedIn as well, and I blog a little bit at jakewalsh.co.uk. So please do feel free to reach out. So this session is going to be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of Virtual WAN. It's an area you could actually spend quite a significant amount of time on. Being honest, it covers a lot of areas, and what it touches, is all of the sort of core networking components that really, people spend a lot of time on that design, getting that right and making sure it is sort of fit for their needs and purposes. So this is a sort of an overview. I'll leave you with some resources. I'll leave you with some demo environments as well. I've got some Terraform for that I'll share. But really, this is just designed to give an overview, sort of go through what Virtual WAN is and how you might use it and where it might fit in your environment as well. So Azure Virtual WAN is actually a networking service, brings various elements together in a single operational interface. So that's things like, your routing, your route tables, things like firewalling, express routes, site-to-site VPNs, point-to-site VPNs. Some of those key features, software-defined connectivity, the ability to connect branch offices over Microsoft's network, the ability to manage networks centrally. So, for example, a single place to go to look at that networking configuration, but also things like optimized security and agility. So the ability to spin up extra regions quickly to extend your network to places that perhaps that would have traditionally been challenging to do so. Things like security, I'll touch on this a little bit later, but you can integrate with lots of Azure security features, things like Azure Firewall, but also we can look at third-party security offerings as well. Just a point as well, Virtual WAN has actually been around for quite some time, although I think, it's taken, I think it's a fair thing to say, a little while to sort of mature and become more common, but been around since sort of 2018. So starting to get more common in environments nowadays. So yeah, as I said, it's a networking service that brings various aspects together in a single Azure service. So things like your traditional hub and spoke topologies, that's replaced with a Virtual WAN hub, and then a VNet peering from your spokes into those hubs. And typically you'd have a hub in every region, but I'll come on to that in a little bit later. Things like routing and route tables. So whilst you can have manual control, that also can be automated. So for example, bringing additional regions online, that can be managed for you, controlled for you. The routing can be automated. So a lot of the hassle is taken out of things like, hey, we're spinning up another region here. We need to think about the routes. We need to think about all of our route tables. That will be automated for you using Virtual WAN. Things like VPNs. So I've actually recently been working on a project to provide a point-to-site VPN using Azure Virtual WAN, amongst other things. And that's actually across multiple regions. It has regional failover. Lots of that can be done and managed for you using Virtual WAN as well. Firewalling as well, so options for Azure native, so Azure Firewall, very, very powerful, very comprehensive, but also the ability to bring in third-party NVAs through those providers as well. So I think this is an important point as well. Virtual WAN's always improving. There's lots of, as with many Azure services, there's lots of things that keep changing, keep improving. If you're looking at Virtual WAN, I'd thoroughly recommend having a look at this link. Just do a quick search for Virtual WAN, what's new, you'll certainly find that, or just visit the link in the slide there. But yeah, there's lots of stuff coming all the time. Most recent update, certainly when I took this screenshot a couple of weeks ago anyway, there's been updates fairly regularly. So just worth checking out and looking at what's, coming up, any known issues, things in preview, that sort of stuff. This is just something that I wanted to touch on as well. Interestingly, probably one of the one of the more sort of requested features for Virtual WAN, but routing intent, so actually allowing you to send that private or internet traffic through any security features deployed in the hub. So for example, with Virtual WAN now, you can force all traffic, whether it's private traffic destined for the internet, through a service like Azure Firewall. So, from this point forward, you have that centralized control of that traffic, subject to your policies. And then whether you're using third-party MVAs or Azure Firewall, it doesn't really matter. You've got the control of that traffic. So yeah, a really important change. But again, just something I wanted to call out to show those improvements that do take place. So Virtual WAN's available pretty much everywhere. I took this screenshot as well. You can see, the vast majority of Azure regions. I'm not actually aware of any that are missing on that screenshot. But yeah, please do correct me if I'm wrong on that. But as you can see, a wide range of regions and locations it's available. Also available in US government and Azure China. Worth just considering availability zones if you're going to be using those as well. There are some extra considerations, something just to have a look at and make sure, that it is the right choice for you. So just some of the use cases for Virtual WAN. So I think the key aspect to call out here is that Virtual WAN is designed to bring together those core networking features. So, the things that perhaps would have typically been separate and different elements you had to build in your environment. So branch connectivity, things like branch-to-branch traffic via Microsoft Network, site-to-site connectivity, remote user VPNs, private connectivity over services like ExpressRoute, intra-cloud as well, so transitive connectivity for virtual networks, again, VPNs, ExpressRoute, router configuration. Excuse me, just clear my throat there. Azure Firewall Manager integration, and then transit and internal connectivity as well, so things like hub-spoke or spoke-to-spoke communication. Sorry, slight frog in my throat there. So something I often say to customers when I talk about Virtual WAN, it's a little bit like a buffet. There's lots of services you can sort of pick and choose from. You will need to choose the services that you want to use. Some organizations would use lots of those services, others will just use a few. You may even go back for another helping. That's very much the way I would look at Virtual WAN. Just a note on upgrades as well. So there are actually two SKUs for Virtual WAN. There's Basic, and that offers you a basic hub, and the configurations there provide site-to-site VPNs only. There's also a standard SKU, and that offers you things like ExpressRoute, user VPNs, site-to-site VPNs, all of the transit connectivity, firewalls, and NVAs. Worth noting, you can upgrade from Basic to Standard, but you can't go back from Standard to Basic as well. So just a consideration there. Being completely honest, in production environments, I've only ever seen Standard in use. Just, yeah, you can see from the feature set there. So just a rough example topology. You can see here we have a single region Virtual WAN. We have ExpressRoute to a HQ, perhaps a main office site or something like that. Lots of VNets all with a peering into that hub. And we've got a point-to-site VPN for the dial-in users. And we've got branch sites either connected in over perhaps an SD-WAN or a site-to-site VPN. So this is fairly typical topology for Virtual WAN. So just some of the core components to touch on. So there are really 5 key components that you'll actually use if you do a deployment that spans more than one region. So you will need Virtual WAN to start with, and that's the control aspect. So that's deployed in a specific region and gives you that centralized control of the whole Virtual WAN topology. You will then need a hub. And that hub is kind of your virtual routing unit, your virtual router, and typically you'd have one of those in each region that you deploy into. If you are deploying to multiple regions, then you'll probably have hub-to-hub connections as well. So those are actually where all of your regional hubs will be able to communicate, and those connections represent the sort of the connections between the various regions in the Virtual WAN topology. You'll then have hub virtual network connections. That's your spoke virtual networks connecting into those hubs. And you'll also have hub route tables. Now, By default, they will be managed for you, but you can put your own custom routes or perhaps some static routes that you need to override that into those as well. So you still have that control. So just going to break some of those down for you just to give a bit of an overview of those. So the actual virtual WAN instance, that entity you create, is the virtual overlay of your Azure networking. It's a collection of multiple resources, and this is effectively the point that you use to control the whole virtual WAN topology. So you deploy that, and then you start creating those hubs in the regions that you require. You then actually create the hubs, and those are typically deployed in the regions that you require, typically one per region, obviously because that scales. Again, more on the scaling later. But typically, for example, if you're deploying perhaps in the UK, you probably have a hub in UK South and a hub in UK West. The virtual hub is a Microsoft managed virtual network that contains various service endpoints, and it's the core of your virtual WAN topology. Typically one per region, could be more should you require though. Gateways for services like VPN, site-to-site, point-to-site, and ExpressRoute are deployed within those hubs. Firewalls and NVAs are also deployed into those hubs. And again, as I pointed out, we do need to consider those routing units. So routing units are what the hub uses to scale. So for example, you can scale from a small deployment all the way up to quite a large deployment. I don't have the figures to hand, but it's worth just having a look at that just to check it does scale to the requirements that you need. And again, just looking at what's in those hubs. So we've got services like Virtual Network Gateway, ExpressRoute Gateway, Point-to-Site Gateway, Azure Firewalls, NVAs, route tables, and our hub-to-hub connection. So again, you can see here, that's that centralized point that a lot of those services are connecting into. So when we talk about a hub-to-hub connection, this is how our virtual WAN hubs are connected to each other within our virtual WAN. So when we connect multiple hubs into a virtual WAN, those become what we call fully meshed. They can communicate freely and routing is propagated. Now that's a kind of a really important concept for virtual WAN because, for example, in this diagram, you can see we've got VNets in region 1 and we've got VNets in region 2. If we created a typical hub spoke topology, something like that, and we didn't create those route tables, those wouldn't be able to communicate. We'd have to actually go away and set that up, make sure the routing was correct. With virtual WAN, that is managed for us. So it's a very, very comprehensive way of making sure that we have that full mesh communication that we need. So region A can talk to region B, et cetera, but we also can control that using a service like Azure Firewall, for example. So when we talk about a hub virtual network connection, that's actually how a spoke virtual network connects into that virtual WAN hub. So this is the kind of the replacement, if you like, for the hub spoke peering that we'd normally see within a typical Azure environment. A virtual network can be connected to a single virtual WAN hub, and then traffic is then enabled between that hub and the spoke. And then in the case of the vast majority of environments, Azure Firewall or an NVA would be used to actually control that traffic. So when we talk about a hub route table as well, each hub actually has its own default route table that can be edited. So you can actually override that. You can put static routes and they take precedence over any dynamic routes. So for example, if we need to force traffic to a certain location, override something, we still have that control. You're not losing any control by going down the virtual WAN route. Route tables are associated with a hub and its connected virtual networks, and things like VPN, ExpressRoute, all of those types of connections also have a routing configuration that propagates to that route table as well. We can use labels to logically group those route tables, and it just gives you that point to control all of that. Just worth noting, it is worth reading this link here, the Microsoft Learn link, just to understand a little bit more about those. There are some considerations that need to just be sort of bared in mind when you're actually building out a virtual WAN topology. So when we talk about hub and spoke, this is perhaps one of the common questions that comes up, particularly when I talk to customers that say, hey, look, we're looking at virtual WAN, but where does it fit? What's the replacement for hub and spoke? And we want to move to this. How do we actually look at going down this route. So Virtual WAN actually replaces those existing hub spoke architectures. Think of the hub as being replaced by the Virtual WAN hub. So all of those services that would typically be in a hub, gateways, point to site, VPN, express route, firewalling, they are brought into that Virtual WAN hub for you. Those hubs then become fully managed by Virtual WAN, and again you get that central management of all of the hubs in the topology. All of your spokes would then peer into a Virtual WAN hub, and you get that connectivity and inter-region traffic routed via that hub and controlled, if you need it, by a service like Azure Firewall, for example. So just a note to talk about some of the core benefits. Appreciate I've gone through a few bits here, but I think this is just important to cover off. So Virtual WAN is actually an integrated solution. It's a single point of control for those core networking aspects, and it's done under a single resource. So for example, Virtual WAN is the resource managing that for you. You have site-to-site connectivity. All of those items come under that single interface, the Virtual WAN object within your Azure environment. It's also an automated solution. So when you connect virtual networks to the hub, it allows you to bring those services into Virtual WAN. Again, it's easy to do. They're centralized, it's simple, and a lot of the things are automated. So bringing in additional regions, for example, you don't need to worry about reconfiguring routing, so on and so forth. Sorry, I've got the worst dry throat ever today. Troubleshooting as well, so end-to-end visibility. You have that visibility, you can then rapidly diagnose issues, and it just makes troubleshooting much simpler than if you had lots of disparate items perhaps in your environment. Centralized control, really important as well. It's a centralized service that brings that core networking together, removes the need to configure and manage multiple separate resources. So again, centralization and making things simpler is the goal here, really. Integrations to Azure Firewall, Firewall Manager, various NVA options. There are lots of options for Azure Firewall, lots of options for third parties, lots of ways you can centrally control and manage that as well. I also think perhaps for me, certainly by far the best aspect of Virtual WAN is that rapid expansion. So being able to expand quickly and simply to other regions, automated routing, simplified connectivity via Microsoft's global network, that is one of the real key features of Virtual WAN as well, and a huge benefit if you're an organization that does need that expansion option. So just going to take a look at some of these services now. So I talked about how the solution is integrated. Well, when you actually have a Virtual WAN deployed, you get this single interface. So here you can see I've got 2 hubs deployed, one in UK South, one in East US. I can see my hubs. I can see my VPN sites. I can look at my user VPN configurations, express route, virtual network connections, and so on and so forth. So all of that is brought into this single interface, makes things very easy, very straightforward. It's also automated as well. So here I've deployed a hub. Admittedly, I've deployed this just clicking through the portal, but actually this could be done in Terraform. It could be done in Bicep. What's really nice as well, though, is if I want to actually deploy additional services. So, for example, I decide, hey, in the UK South region, I need, as part of this hub, I need a VPN gateway creating. I can just click that, follow the instructions, and that's built and provisioned for me within that hub. It makes it very simple and, again, very straightforward to consume those services that we need. Metrics are also readily available, so we do get that end-to-end visibility. We can rapidly diagnose problems. We have simple troubleshooting, so on and so forth. Again, just coming back to this screen of the portal, but centralized control is really important here as well. So a single place to control all of those core networking elements, things like our VPN gateways, our user VPN gateways for point-to-site connections, express route, Azure Firewall, any NVAs we have deployed, it's all controlled from this single interface. Again, here I've deployed Azure Firewall. Sorry, in fact, I haven't deployed Azure Firewall. I have 2 unsecured virtual hubs ready to deploy Azure Firewall. But you can see here, for example, we can select those hubs, and then we can go through the process to have Azure Firewall deployed into them. We can then manage that with Firewall Manager. Again, very simple, very straightforward, very centralized as well. Also, just to talk on expansion a little bit, but if we do need to expand to other regions, here I've got a virtual WAN deployed. I'm deployed into the UK South region. I'm deployed into the East US region, needing another hub. Perhaps, you know, I work for a business that's decided to open a branch somewhere else. I simply click on new hub. I can deploy another hub. It becomes integrated as part of my virtual WAN. Very simple, very straightforward, automated routing, really simplifying that connectivity as well. So can't talk about networking without talking about security. So there's really 5 key areas that need to be considered. So this is not by any means exhaustive. There are other things that would need to be considered, but these are just 5 I want to touch on. One is that there are numerous options for things like Azure Firewall. Obviously, you can deploy that. You also have various NVA options. Lots of options around monitoring, options around packet capture, administration. There's also a security baseline for virtual WAN that's well worth a read, something just to consider once you're in that perhaps planning or design phase, just to give you a baseline to start working from as well. So yeah, as I've said, firewall and NVA options, you can see here again, I'm really sort of laboring the point a little bit, but all of this is controlled, deployed, managed from this single point. So, you know, here I'm looking at one of my virtual hubs. I have the option to create Azure Firewall. I have the option to deploy NVAs, you know, and that really allows me to deploy whatever I need to fit the needs of the organization I'm either working for or working in. Again, just some of the partner options for NVAs as well. So this, I think, has been updated fairly recently. There's been quite a few changes, but there's lots of various options now that do actually have connectivity and security options for virtual WAN. Yeah, just a couple more options here as well. So things like Checkpoint, Fortinet, lots of different options that you can deploy in your virtual WAN. So obviously, Azure Firewall, as you probably know, provides native firewall option. Again, that can be controlled and managed using Firewall Manager. So of that central point, there are various security partner providers to bring that security as a service offering to virtual WAN. Also, I talked earlier as well about a hub routing intent, so the opportunity to actually control that traffic through one of those security options. So monitoring in virtual WAN as well, very comprehensive. We have a wide range of options using Azure Monitor. We have an insights dashboard for virtual WAN as well. Really, it's a case of whatever you need to monitor, the likelihood is the metrics are there for you. And just to highlight that, you know, for example, there's lots of different metrics that we can start to actually take and consume. And this could be, you know, we just need to perhaps monitor one specific metric, or we want to build a custom dashboard to monitor lots of these different metrics throughout our estate. So yeah, that's just an example of some of the metrics that are available, but there's certainly lots to go out there. So again, for site-to-site VPNs here, you can see there's actually a packet capture option as well. You know, allows you to log those captures to a storage account, optional filters, things like TCP flags or max file size. But if you do need that visibility, the options are there from a monitoring and packet capture perspective. Again, just showing some more of the options. But, you know, again, this really just labors and reinforces my point that everything you need is centralized within this virtual WAN interface. So just a note on administration. Appreciate it's fairly obvious, but I think it's also relevant. So again, centralized cloud network. So when we're using virtual WAN, obviously it's going to be, I should say, Entra ID credentials for administration. So that's things like privileged identity management. We can use MFA. We don't need a jump host or a bastion to administrate our network appliances. We can do that from the Azure portal. We can perhaps do that in code. Again, you know, we have all of the security wraparound that we'd get when managing any other Azure service. I think that's a you know, somewhat obvious point, but it is important. We don't need to sort of, you know, lose any of that security aspect when we're using a service like this. If anything, it leads to lots of enhancements from a security and administration perspective. So I think this is also well worth a read. We have the security baseline for Azure Virtual WAN. Covers lots of information. I would absolutely recommend, if you're looking at Virtual WAN, looking to start that journey, looking at what the security options are, what the baseline contains, have a read of this. It's well worth looking through, and it will help you just understand what you can do, what the sort of baseline recommendations are, things like Defender for Cloud, policy definitions, all of that sort of stuff. Again, a great starting point when looking at a security baseline for Virtual WAN, and really important consideration when planning your deployment as well. So I've talked about expansion being easy. It's not just me saying that, it genuinely is really easy. So this is just a diagram I've put together just to give an example. Let's say we start with a single virtual WAN hub. We have perhaps an express route, we have a VPN gateway, and we have some spokes. We have traffic via Azure Firewall in this sort of single region example. Now, if we're going to expand this, again, it would be a case of just selecting new hub. We would add another hub to our topology, and that would be fully meshed by default, enabling that communication. So just an example of what that could look like once we've actually completed that. We can deploy Azure Firewall, we have multiple spokes, we could perhaps have another express route or a site-to-site VPN, but it is very easy and very straightforward to expand that topology and have the automated routing, the centralized control, kind of the utopia of the network world, so to speak. Again, 2 regions might become 3. Lots of options there for expansion. Lots of easy ways this can actually make that connectivity very easy, very straightforward for you. So just a quick note on expansion. So regional expansion, yes, we can do it. It's very easy to do, very straightforward. Can be done in code, can be done in the portal, however you need to do that. Firewalling options, obviously we can scale up to the premium version of Azure Firewall. Hub routing intent, we can do cross-region and internet traffic now. We can also do that via NVAs or Azure firewalls, whatever you require. Centralizing those firewall rule sets and management, very straightforward, using a service like Firewall Manager. If we do expand to other regions, it becomes very straightforward to put our rule set across all of the regions that we need. Again, Express Route and VPN Gateway, supported in all the regions, supported wherever we need to deploy that technology as well. And again, full mesh topology, so we can enable that communication via the Microsoft global network. Spoke communication enabled as part of that expansion as well. We can have that either uncontrolled or controlled via firewall if required, whatever you need. Also things like automated route table management and provisioning as well. Again, single point of control, so whether we expand, whether we bring the environment perhaps down in size even, doesn't really matter. We have that single control via Virtual WAN. Worth noting as well, we can scale those routing units up to 50 gigabits per second and 50,000 VMs per hub. So there's definitely quite a significant scale there as well. So just a few things on where we begin. I would say this probably goes for anything, not just Virtual WAN, but get familiar with those basic concepts using a lab. I've got a Terraform environment that I'll share a link to that really can help deploy it, see it, break it, get comfortable, understand it. Consider some upskilling and training. AZ700 networking exam, really good one to take. Just help cement some of that knowledge. Have a plan as well. So consider things like the Cloud Adoption Framework, guidance, understand any drivers, goals, objectives. What are you actually setting out to achieve, for example? Organizational deployments, obviously start with a single hub, expand from there. Perhaps run a POC, do some testing. Also consult that guidance. So Microsoft Docs, there is actually a guide on migrating from hub spoke through to Virtual WAN. Also look perhaps to partners, engage a partner. So perhaps someone like an Azure Expert MSP, help you with that design, implementation, and support. So I've actually put together a demo environment as well that I'll share the Terraform code for. It's a very basic virtual WAN environment for labs and testing. Just kind of gives you a sort of starter sample to get going. Terraform-based environment available within my GitHub account. Simple deployment, but it can be expanded as you require. Single subscription, and it puts those core components in and gives you some expansion options. As I say, I will share links after the session. But if you do wish to find that, you can see it in my, if you just go to github.com/jakewalsh90 and then Terraform-Azure repo, you'll find the virtual WAN demo in there, but that'll give you what you need from a Terraform starting point just to get going and perhaps start that learning journey. Just some useful links. I won't read off all of these, but I'll just keep that on the screen for a moment, just something to consider. And yeah, I hope this has been a useful presentation. Apologies for my croaky voice today. Obviously losing my voice a little bit, but yeah, if you have questions, please do feel free to reach out. More than happy to help, and all of my links are on the QR code as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Jake. That was really good, and no problem. I totally understand the voice thing. I've gone through plenty of presentations like that, but you rocked it. It was really good. There was some really useful information in there, and we do have actually one question, and I believe you answered it just after the question come up. I'll throw it up on screen. Is it possible to implement Azure Virtual WAN with an ARM template? And that was from Susheta, and you mentioned you've got some Terraform code. You're going to share probably the GitHub, the repo, and also for your demo. That would be awesome. Or maybe just after this, if you could drop it into the chat, that'd be cool if someone wants to play around with it in the next day or so. But what's your what's your preferred method? I'm assuming Terraform, but
so yeah, I have to confess, I really like Terraform. I've certainly got quite a lot of experience with Terraform, and I find it very easy to use. So I've kind of naturally gravitated towards it. But yeah, it's perfectly possible. ARM, Bicep, Terraform, Portal, whatever works for you. They all have options. Yeah. Cool.
I've got a couple of questions, and I kind of know the answer, but I want to hear it from the expert because I'm not an expert on Azure V1. But these are questions that have been asked to me from either from different consultants or even from customers, right? So you mentioned hub and spoke, which is the kind of the go-to standard for most Azure landing zone and architectures, and the traditional VNet to VNet hub spoke would be the way to go before Azure Virtual WAN come around. I'm actually surprised. I thought it was probably newer than 2018. You mentioned at the start that you've been working with it an earlier since around 2018. Was it always called Azure Virtual WAN, or did it have another code name at that point?
That's a good question. So
that wasn't my original question. That was just something that just popped in there.
I've only ever known it as Virtual WAN, but for me, I've only been using it for perhaps the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's kind of my own kind of insight into it. But look, I suppose it's evolved. Whatever it was, maybe 5-6 years ago, it's evolved. But I suppose my actual question, and again, one that I get asked reasonably frequently, right, is if we're doing a hub and spoke, right, and if we're looking at the cloud adoption framework or enterprise scale landing zones, all that, is VNet to VNet good enough, or is as your hub and spoke, or should we have a V1 as the hub? The logic specifically after your session would be have the V1 as the hub. What's the pros and cons? Why would you choose one over the other?
So I think if you have a very sort of simplistic environment where you perhaps don't need sort of the expansion options, the automated routing, then hub and spoke will work for you. And that's sort of me being frank from a practicality perspective, but also from a cost perspective. Virtual WAN does incur a cost. So I think that's certainly something I would consider. That being said, if you need an environment where you can add in additional spokes, additional hubs, expand to other regions, Virtual WAN does make that very, very simple and very, very straightforward. Take an example of a business where perhaps you only operate in the UK, and you have UK South, UK West. Then along comes the CEO and says, I want to open an office in the US, please. Could you get that done by tomorrow? From a networking perspective, that would be a challenge, because that sometimes means engaging with third-party providers or network providers, looking at circuits, that sort of stuff. With Virtual WAN, you could simply add another region, and it may be that you start with another region and you have a hub that has a gateway for some remote users in that new country you're bringing on to dial in. It might be that you're opening a branch office and you'd like a site-to-site VPN. Well, instead of that site-to-site VPN transiting the public internet all the way back to perhaps your localized Azure region, you could actually spin up another Virtual WAN hub, connect it to that nearest region to where the office is, and then use Microsoft Network to do that. Again, wrapping that all up in the control you have, the firewalling, all of those services. I mean, I have to confess, I have a demo lab I use. I build it using Terraform, use it for demos. That's all built on Virtual WAN because it's just so straightforward. It just takes all of the hassle out of managing routing. And let's be honest, everybody working in IT's got a routing nightmare story they can talk about, haven't they? It's just like a rite of passage. So having that and the ability just to spin things up, deploy in other regions, quickly provision services like gateways, VPNs, point to site, site to site. For me, that's it's gold dust really. So that's perhaps a slightly biased opinion because of how easy it makes things, but I think that's where the value comes in.
I think, likewise, when I talk about technology that I really like, it's not necessarily bias. It's exactly as you said, right? When you've been stung with something, when you've been hit with a problem, and then you have a solution that fixes that problem or makes it easier, or maybe helps other people not get hit with that problem, it's easy to advocate it, right? It's just the way of a consultant. That's how I kind of view it. But I totally get it, by the way, right? We've got many customers who use Azure Virtual WAN. It's just when we're initially engaging on those conversations, the customers who are, I suppose, at the technical level enough to understand to even ask the question. And that's not being derogatory to the customer, but sometimes customers will just say, whatever, how much does it cost? And why do I need it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas others will be, and that's back to Wim's session earlier, right? But others will be, specifically when you're bringing in the networking teams and it's more kind of enterprise scale, they're going to ask, hey, we've looked at this enterprise scale landing zone and it doesn't say anything about vWAN, whereas I found this one and it does. So where we kind of find a big use, and you mentioned it there, Jake, is in our customers that are on that kind of mergers and acquisition trail or that expansion trail where maybe not last minute. Most orgs know if they're going to acquire a company or going to expand it to another region, but there's all of the complexities around those environments that something like Azure vWAN would just makes a lot more sense. And then when you add in the reduced overhead in administering the environment and the centralized routing and the firewall, all of that configuration just makes a lot of sense. So I totally get it.
100%. And I think, things like the ability, let's take another sort of typical organization scenario. A lot of organizations have siloed teams, and sometimes you might have one person who's looking after perhaps network routing or connectivity, somebody else looking after firewalling. And sometimes in a cloud sense, that can be a challenge because you end up with a siloed team called the cloud team who does everything in the cloud. It's just the fact it's in the cloud means it's security, it's networking, it's infrastructure, it's storage. But actually, when you start looking at services like Virtual WAN, integrate it with something like Firewall Manager, where you can hand that off to the right person to manage those rule sets. It's centrally managed, but when somebody comes along and says, hey, I need to spin up 300 VMs in this region, can you give me a VNet, please? Yes, we can. And then you need to go and do the security bit as well. It's not like a bolt-on that skips the process. And that, I think, that simplification of making things easy and straightforward really helps in those sort of enterprise type scenarios.
Agree, totally. Last question, right? And again, another one I've seen more on social media that I've had customers asking. This is more an opinion, I suppose, but and we're kind of talking preview as well. Azure vWAN versus Azure Virtual Network Manager, pros and cons. Now, I know you're going to say they're two completely different things, right? But, right. So, but you see it on social media, right? So, on Microsoft, maybe sometimes they do a great job on marketing new products coming out, and other times they don't do such a great job, right? And the general public will think, oh, Azure Virtual Network Manager, maybe that's something the same as vWAN or cheaper, whatever.
I got the same questions quite a lot.
Yeah, right.
Exactly the same question.
And that's fine, right? And we don't, we're all consultants, we're all advocates, we're community enthusiasts as well, right? So it's our job to try and break that down and make it easier, collectively as a community for our customers or just for people who are not maybe networking ninjas. So Jake, probably the last word on this to you, just a super high level helicopter view on that. If you're asked, you probably asked that once or twice at least, or if you've seen it, and I know that I appreciate your different products, right? But if someone asks you that question, what's your answer?
I think so. The network manager option is more around the control aspect, whereas virtual WAN is more around deploying the right building blocks for your network. That would probably be my answer. But I think it's sometimes a tricky one to answer because it depends entirely on the organization or the goals or the requirements. For me, I like to start with virtual WAN as the kind of the building point or the starting point, and then go from there. I find, particularly for customers that are perhaps new to cloud, just starting with here's the building blocks and then we go from there is an important step, because I don't like to sort of go from sort of no cloud to everything at 1,000,000 miles an hour in one step. But that's so I rambled a bit there, but that's kind of the approach I would be taking.
No, it's perfect. It's again high level.
I have a question, Jake. If someone's new to virtual WAN, like for example, was to troubleshoot an issue, how would they troubleshoot an issue if it's a network related or if it's like a different provider?
So if it's pure virtual WAN, then you still have all of the same troubleshooting options you're used to with the majority of Azure services. You get the support options, you get the ability to export data to things like log analytics. You can build your own monitoring dashboards. All of the sort of the standard aspects you'd come to expect are in place. If it's a third-party NVA, obviously there's a crossover there. So that would be the same, for example, as if you deployed an NVA-based firewall solution and you were using a route table to force traffic to it in a hub spoke. You would need to determine whether the issue lay within the cloud networking config or the cloud environment, or whether it was an issue with a third-party solution, for example. I think that's probably a good example actually of an area where there's always going to be a little bit of crossover. It's the same, for example, if you're running some software on a Windows server, is the problem the software or the Windows server? It's the same sort of situation.
Okay.
Cool. So I don't think we've any more questions, and conscious of time for everyone, I really appreciate everyone giving up their spare time to enlighten everyone else about Azure Cost Management and Azure Virtual WAN tonight. Nicholas, do you want to wrap it up, or is there anything else that you or Wim or Jake you want to add before we close it out?
Just a thank you. Sorry for the croaky voice.
Just
thanks for having us.
Thanks for hosting us.
Not at all, no problem,
We'll
guys.
just play an outro for next episode. 1 minute. Okay.